In the pre-dawn darkness of September 24, 1877, a heavy rain fell on a small hill overlooking the city of Kagoshima. On this hill, called Shiroyama, a terrible silence hung between the thunder of imperial artillery. Here, 500 men, the last of a warrior class that had ruled Japan for 700 years, stood waiting. They were surrounded, penned in by an army of 30,000 imperial soldiers who were armed with modern rifles, cannons, and Gatling guns. Outnumbered 60 to 1, the samurai had little more than their swords, a dwindling supply of musket ammunition, and an ancient code of honor that had defined their entire lives. They'd been offered a chance to surrender, to live in the new world that was rapidly erasing their own. They refused. Instead, as the sun began to rise, they drew their swords for one last hopeless charge. This wasn't a battle for victory. This was a battle for death. So why? Why did these 500 men, some of the most revered warriors in Japanese history, choose to be annihilated? To get that, you have to understand the world they lost and the reluctant man who led them into oblivion.
Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't, as an encouragement for more of this kind of content.
The New World and the Broken Sword. For centuries, the samurai were the undisputed backbone of Japan. They were the political and military elite, a class of warriors who lived and died by a strict code of honor known as bushido. Their swords weren't just weapons, they were a symbol of their status, their soul, and their right to rule. But in the mid-19th century, Japan was violently shaken from its long isolation. The arrival of American warships, the infamous Black Ships, forced the country to open its doors to the West. This lit the fuse on a revolution. In 1868, the old feudal government of the shogun was overthrown, and power was restored to the Emperor Meiji. The Meiji Restoration, as it was called, kicked off a period of frantic, sweeping change. Japan's new leaders believed the only way to avoid being colonized was to become like the West. So they began to modernize with breathtaking speed, building factories, railways, and a modern government. But for this new Japan to be born, the old Japan had to die. And the heart of the old Japan was the samurai. The new government started taking apart the samurai class piece by piece. Their feudal lands were abolished and turned into prefectures. Their traditional rice stipends, the income that had sustained their families for generations, were swapped for low-interest government bonds. Then came the deepest cuts of all. In 1873, a national conscript army was created, open to any man, regardless of his background. Suddenly, the hereditary warrior class were no longer the nation's exclusive protectors. The final humiliation came in 1876, a law forbidding anyone from wearing swords in public. This wasn't a rule change, it was an attack on their very identity. In just a few short years, the samurai were stripped of their purpose, their privileges, and their honor. They were warriors trained for a world that no longer existed. All this anger and frustration needed a figurehead, and it found one in a man named Saigo Takamori. The irony? Saigo wasn't some relic fighting against the new era. He was one of its main architects. A high-ranking samurai from the powerful Satsuma domain, Saigo was a key commander in the war that brought Emperor Meiji to power. He was a towering figure, both physically and politically, a man respected for his integrity and his devotion to the samurai code. After the Restoration, he even served in the new government and helped set up the very conscript army that made the samurai obsolete. But Saigo grew deeply troubled. He saw the frantic rush to westernize as a betrayal of Japan's soul and felt the politicians in Tokyo were becoming corrupt. The breaking point came in 1873 over a dispute about how to handle relations with Korea. Saigo, believing a military expedition would give the disenfranchised samurai a renewed sense of purpose, pushed for it. When the government flatly rejected his plan, he resigned from all his posts and went home to Satsuma. Back home, he became a reluctant hero for thousands of angry, jobless samurai. He opened private military academies, teaching classic literature and traditional martial arts, not to plot a rebellion, but to preserve the samurai spirit he felt was being destroyed. He insisted his loyalty was to the emperor, but things reached a boiling point when the central government sent spies to Satsuma and then tried to remove weapons from the local arsenal. Saigo's students exploded, sparking the conflict we now call the Satsuma Rebellion. Reluctantly, Saigo agreed to lead them, believing his only option was to march to Tokyo and demand answers from the government. He was now the leader of a rebellion he never wanted, against a government he helped create. The Satsuma Rebellion wasn't a single, romantic last stand. It was a brutal, 7-month civil war that tore across Japan's southern island of Kyushu. And let's get one thing straight. Despite what you might have seen in the movies, the samurai didn't just bring swords to a gunfight. At the start of the rebellion, Saigo's army was a formidable force of around 20,000 men, armed with rifles, muskets, and artillery. They were skilled, disciplined, and fighting for a cause they believed in. Their first major target was Kumamoto Castle, the main imperial army garrison in the area. Saigo probably thought the castle would fall quickly and that other samurai would flock to his banner. He was wrong on both counts. The imperial garrison, a mix of conscripted peasants and former samurai, held on heroically for almost 2 months. That siege was a complete disaster for the rebels. It bought the government precious time to bring its full power to bear. The imperial army, with its massive numbers, modern supply lines, and better weapons, began to relentlessly grind Saigo's forces down. In a series of bloody battles, like the one at Tabaruzaka, the rebels were slowly beaten back. Their supplies were cut, and they started running out of ammunition. Many surrendered or deserted. By late summer, Saigo's once mighty army was just a few thousand desperate men. They fought a guerrilla campaign through the mountains until they finally broke through imperial lines and retreated to their home city of Kagoshima. There, with only about 500 loyal followers left, Saigo made his way to the small defensible hill of Shiroyama to prepare for the end. The samurai code of bushido is a complex mix of virtues: courage, integrity, loyalty, and honor. It's a philosophy that has captivated people for generations. What parts of that code, if any, do you think are still relevant in our world today? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're interested in more incredible stories from history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a thing. On Shiroyama, the end was certain. The imperial army, now 30,000 strong, formed an inescapable ring around the hill. They dug trenches and earthen walls, while warships in the bay aimed their powerful guns on the small samurai position. The imperial commander, General Yamagata Aritomo, sent one last message to his old colleague Saigo, pleading with him to surrender. No reply ever came. For days, thousands of shells rained on the hill, turning the forest into splintered wreckage. The last samurai, who had been melting down metal statues to cast their own bullets, huddled in shelters dug into the dirt, waiting. In the final hours, as the cannons fell silent, Saigo and his men shared a final, ceremonial drink of sake. He told them that while their cause was lost, their honor was not. The only path left was to show the new Japan how the true samurai of old knew how to die. At 4 a.m. on September 24th, the imperial soldiers began their final attack. In a scene of unbelievable chaos, the last 500 samurai charged downhill, straight into the teeth of the modern army. For a few desperate moments, their mastery of the sword caused panic among the conscript soldiers who weren't trained for that kind of brutal, close-quarters fighting. But it was hopeless. The sheer weight of numbers and the relentless fire from rifles and Gatling guns simply tore them apart. In the hailstorm of bullets, Saigo was struck in the hip and abdomen. The exact details of what happened next are debated, but the most accepted story is a perfect echo of the bushido code. Unable to go on, Saigo was carried to a quiet spot by his most loyal follower, Beppu Shinsuke. There, facing the imperial palace, Saigo is said to have committed seppuku, or ritual suicide. Beppu acted as his second, cutting off his head to preserve his honor and keep it from becoming a trophy for the enemy. Seeing their leader fall, the last 40 remaining samurai drew their swords, charged one last time, and were cut down to a man. The Battle of Shiroyama was over in just a few hours. With the deaths of Saigo and his followers, the Satsuma Rebellion was crushed, and the samurai class was extinguished forever. The imperial government's power was now absolute, clearing the path for Japan to become a modern industrial and military giant. So why did they choose to die? Because in their world, a world defined by the code of bushido, surrender was the ultimate dishonor. For Saigo and his men, life without honor was a fate worse than death. Their final charge wasn't a military move, it was a statement. It was a final, bloody testament to the values they refused to let die. Though the government branded him a traitor, the people never saw him that way. Legends even spread that he hadn't died, but had ascended to Mars to watch over Japan. Eventually, the government gave in to public adoration, pardoning him in 1889 and putting up a famous statue of him in Tokyo. He became known as the last true samurai, a tragic hero who embodied the spirit of an age that had to be destroyed for the nation of Japan to be born. His story, and the story of the 500 who died with him, is a brutal reminder that progress often comes at a terrible price, and that for some, a death with honor is the only victory that truly matters.